time we go, gotta learn to let it go.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential selves so that they can stop sleepwalking through life.
Hi, welcome back to the Wake the F Up podcast. I'm Katie Coffey and I'm filling in for Alex and David while they are out on maternity leave, and we have Whitney Allen joining us again.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have you back. We need to hear what's been going on in your life. Since the last time that you came on, fill us in a little bit.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me back. I loved our conversation. I think it was like last summer, so it's been more than a year. So a lot has happened. There's been like a lot of changes. I guess the biggest one is we're like settled into our new home. We probably had just moved in when we first chatted last summer. We moved like in June. So settling into our house. My fiance and I, we got engaged in February of this year. So that happened in the interim, planning a wedding for this upcoming January. I found a publisher that is publishing my second book. So that comes out in March. So a lot of things are happening since the last time we connected here.
I was going to ask if we should be expecting a second book out. For our listeners that are just joining in, Whitney Allen is a widow who has met someone new, and she had a book out that was really successful. So I'm excited to hear that you're having a second book. Do you want to fill in people who are just hearing and meeting you for the first time a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so like Katie said, I'm a widow. My late husband, Ryan, he had a very severe reaction to a bee sting in October of 2021, which resulted in an anoxic brain injury that he couldn't recover from. And he passed away in April of 2022. And since that time, I've really dedicated my entire life. I left my law practice. I was an attorney for a firm. I did medical malpractice defense, and I've completely devoted my life to helping those that are grieving and those that have been through a life-altering loss. Like I've been through, see the light after tragedy and be able to create a beautiful life after loss, because I think, and I see this all the time on social media, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the grief space that like it won't get better, and it's kind of like all downhill. And I just refuse to believe that as a 35-year-old with two little boys. Like I never wanted to think like this was the end for me in terms of my happiness and my purpose and having like peace again in my life. So I found all of that again for myself, although it feels very different now because my life is so different. I'm different now. I have been able to create a beautiful life after the death of my husband. So that I teach people and I show people how to do the same in their lives after a loss.
I think it's so interesting how you wrote a book and like how you present your story. I feel like a lot of people in the trauma space or people that are going through anything, whether it's grief or any type of loss, often where tragedy is like a victim and like as an identity. But I really feel like with how you hold yourself and the way that you talk about your trauma, you wear it like a badge of honor. And I was wondering, what do you think? What is the difference between being in that space and the slight shift of being in the other space of what you're talking about of being doom and gloom? Like, where can people find the understanding that it's a choice between one or the other?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think you're so right. I think, you do have a choice. It feels like all of our choices are taken away from us when we go through a life altering event, right? Like everything feels chaotic, it feels out of our control. But when we really step back and we think about it, we could let grief and trauma consume us, where, like we let those maladaptive coping mechanisms really run the show, like drink your way out of grief, drug your way out of grief, like distract your way out of grief, whatever it is. Or you can choose to do the harder thing, which is get really uncomfortable, face your grief and your pain up front, and learn how to process it and move through it, and know that you can bear it, right? Like life isn't about being happy all the time. That is not the meaning of life, right? Like if the goal in life is to always be happy, you're always going to be disappointed. I look at it as life. The goal is to have a meaningful, intentional life, because when you're going through something really hard, it doesn't mean you're always going to be happy, but is there meaning to come from it? Is there a lesson to come from it? Is there purpose to come from it? Absolutely. If you can kind of like shift your focus. But I think people really get stuck. They get stuck in the past. And that's the difference between being able to move forward and getting really stuck in your trauma, because trauma's in the past. And you become traumatized when you feel like you're out of control, like you couldn't change what happened. And instead of accepting that, moving through that, and being able to surrender to that fact and finding a way to feel safe again, because trauma makes us feel unsafe, you just repeatedly get caught up in what happened in the past, and then you relive it over and over and over again, and you get caught in this cycle where you can't change what happened, but that's all there is. So until you're able to say, okay, that's done now, that actually is in the past, instead of living as if it's happening right now in your present, you're never going to be able to move forward. And a lot of the work I do with clients is being able to, because PTSD is a real thing, and that is like trauma in the present, um, because you're reliving that traumatic event. So it's being able to take away the physical symptoms, the emotional symptoms of what happened to you, and not have that completely overwhelm what's happening in the present.
How did you come to the conclusion that moving forward is the right thing? Like, how did you get there? And one more thing. I have one more question. How much misinformation was there when you became a widow that you had to sort through to find what you felt like was truth for actually finding healing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think this is true for a lot of people that are going through a loss, whether you're a widow or, you've just lost someone else in your life that you really love. Like you Google, right? Like how to get through grief, like how to find happiness again, right? Like dating after the death of a spouse, and like all these things, like all the articles that you read. It's so oversimplified, and it truly, because it's not written, a lot of the stuff, most of it's not written by widows, right? Or they're not written by grievers. It's like a very sterile perception of what the experience is like. So I think I learned early on to not over, you know, I guess, overthink things, overanalyze things, and try to get information, because I knew pretty much very closely after I lost Ryan that I needed to do this authentically. The answers weren't going to be found in like an article, right? They were going to be found in myself internally, finding that internal piece. It wasn't going to help like externally, right? I had to find things within myself to find peace and happiness. Like I wasn't going to be able to do that outside of myself. Um, so I think that was just a realization I came to very soon after his death. Like this was my journey, and it really didn't matter what other people had done in the past, what people were saying, the antiquated expectations or rules or whatever that you can find now, and drowning out a lot of the noise. And I think another thing that we get caught up in is that there's so much suffering and grieving in the world. There's so many very big events happening. And I think it's okay to shut that off for a while you deal with your own grief, right? Like your personal grief journey, because we're not meant to take on the world's grief. That is not what as humans we're even really capable of doing, because we get caught up in like, oh, well, like the thing happening across the world is so much worse than like losing my husband. But your grief is always going to be the worst, right? Because it's yours. And you have to deal with your grief first before you can take on anyone else's grief or anybody else's, like the world's trauma. And I think just leaning into your own experience is probably the best thing that you can do for yourself and drowning out all of the noise.
How do you drown out the noise? How do you, literally?
Now I'm at a point in my journey, about 3 years out now, that, I can take in a little bit more like grief things, which is why I know in the grief space it's like a lot of doom and gloom, and there's not a lot of optimism in that space. But while I was really in the acute stages, I wasn't looking up like articles, right? Like I wasn't Googling. I only read a few books. And the reason I wrote my first book was because I couldn't find anything that truly captured the rawness of the experience. So that's why I wrote my first book, Ready in Trauma Stilettos, because I couldn't find anything that even touched my experience. And my second book, my first book was a memoir. My second book is really, it's a cross between self-help and a memoir. So it really will help somebody walk themselves through the process of grief, but it still contains the raw aspects of my own journey, which I think are really helpful to people. Like that's what people really relate to, is like, what did you do? Like, how did you get through the specific aspect of grief? Like, for example, going through a loved one's physical items, like their clothing, like that's something not a lot of people talk about. And I think it's important to talk about those things.
Well, I think people
But
need authenticity, and I think that you do that so well. People need authenticity, but people also need hope. Like
Mhm.
the world needs hope. We need to know that things can get better. Whatever you're going through, like things can be better, but it's definitely, like you said, it's not something that you can just pop a pill and fix. Like it's really not that simple. And I think we live in a world that is so microwave and wants everything to be simple, and we expect, and we're in a culture that has immediate gratification, and you can't deal with your inner world like that. It's not real. It's not reality. And so I think that that's another thing that widows and grievers are facing on top of their grief. It's like, how do you even operate in a space that doesn't really show you, or like isn't cultivated for the real work? You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
yeah. And I think also, nowadays in the culture of like influencers and like overconsumption, like we get so lost in what's important, right? Like, Um, I feel, I have a lot of like my community is very large, but there are like other people that are influencers, and not that their work isn't important, or it makes people happy, but it's like people get so consumed in things that just like are not important in life, and we lose this perspective, like family and like how to support others, and people want to they want to avoid grief, right? They want to avoid death, um because it's not a pleasant thing to think about. I think I was exactly the same before my world fell apart. Is like I completely avoided that world of grief. Like if a reel came by where someone had suffered a tremendous loss, I was like, okay, not interested in that, because that's never going to happen to me. Like I don't want to see that. But I think it's important to, and I get a lot of criticism for sharing some really hard things. Like, why are you sharing this online? Like, this should be private. And it's like, that's the problem. Like, the problem is that you think that my grief and like my tragedy should be kept private, when when other people are going through the same things too, and maybe they need to see that somebody else is going through this really hard time. And when we're told to like shut up and to like keep it private, that makes everybody feel shamed, like they can't share their grief.
I think too, you're coming from such a perspective of wanting to help other people. And I think that also might be a part of the piece of healing, is seeing the humanity in others as well, not just being so like that's so not a selfish way to think. And I think that it could be easy for people to think like, I just need to share my story because I'm hurting. But when you're like, I need to share my story because someone out there might need to hear what I'm going through, and someone needs to know that they're not alone, like that's a different energy. that you have.
Yeah.
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 And
Because it's, and I, like another point of criticism that I get is like making money off of like my husband's death, which is like kind of ridiculous because I didn't, first of all, like I didn't choose this life. I wish that I could go back and be a lawyer again and like not know loss and grief. Um, and it's, this work is really hard. I don't think people understand. Like, I took the harder road by doing this work instead of going back to my life as an attorney. Um, Sitting with people in extreme pain is a very hard experience. It takes up so much energy. And to be able to show up for people in a way that's really helpful and that can hold space for them in their most vulnerable, and be able to compartmentalize my experience and be fully invested in someone's own journey. That's hard. That's like not an easy thing to do. So people think it's just like a quick buck. It's actually so much harder than just like being a lawyer. It really
somebody
is.
who said that to you? Who's telling you these things? Because I would not even. I mean, that would never cross my mind. You know.
Oh my gosh, a lot of people think I get so many messages about that all the time. Like, oh, you're just using your husband's death for clout. Like, oh, she needed to make a quick buck. Like, all of these things that are just completely, well, like just untrue. And I fell into this whole like content creator thing. Like, I hate even calling myself that because I really don't view myself as that at all. It's just I started sharing the experience because people wanted updates from me and I didn't have the capacity to like text everyone back personally. So I started sharing on Facebook and Instagram. So it was kind of just like a curated um kind of like a, hey, this is what's going on with like the experience right now because people wanted like people in the community really cared and they wanted to know what was going on. And I didn't want, misinformation to get out there about what was happening with Ryan and everything. And it just snowballed. And then after he died, I just kept sharing because the experience made me realize that we don't talk enough about grief and loss and trauma in a way that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, too, social media is for many people. It's first of all, a literal dopamine hit, and so it's a little bit jarring when someone is not just sharing something that's funny or whatever, like, and yeah, people want to pass it up because they don't want to deal with it. And the reason why anyone would say anything to you is because it makes them uncomfortable because it's a little too close to the truth. And like you said, people don't want to deal with death because they haven't gone there themselves personally and they're afraid to. And so when they see someone speaking their truth and walking with confidence and just a knowing of what life is all about, I think that that's intimidating to people because then they have to ask themselves the hard questions. And then also too, like, don't ever get offended if you go on their profile and it's like, if they're not writing books and they're not doing all the things you're doing, like, it's a grain of salt. But I could definitely see, was that hard for you to kind of get some of that feedback? Or were you just like, was it easy?
Uh, no, it's hard, especially, now I'm in such a different place with it. It doesn't bother me except when they talk about my kids, like that bothers me. And I think that will always bother me because I just feel so protective of them. And like, especially with, my fiance Anthony, like when it comes to him and them, I can take people saying things about me, but when it comes to them, I just feel like very protective. Um, but yeah, it's a lot to get used to when you are coming from being, relatively anonymous and having a very private life to somebody that, you know, like millions of people see your content and know about you now. And it's a very weird shift. And then on top of it, people saying mean things that aren't from a basis that they have no understanding. Um, of course, like it's hard not to get defensive, but I think, over time, I'm just really rooted in my mission, and what I'm doing. So I try not to let it bother me, but people are just really mean. I just can't, honestly, I just can't believe how ignorant people are and just how cruel they can be. And, I think those people are truly like, they're just not very good people. And I don't even engage with it because somebody that has that mindset, my job isn't to make them understand. It's to show up for people that need the support. And there's always going to be people that don't agree with you. And, I've come to a peace with that.
Absolutely. You have your head screwed on straight. I just want to let you know that. You truly do. I really need to take time and space to, like you said, disconnect from that, because at the end of the day, it's like, this isn't even it's a tool. That's not reality. So outside of wake stuff, for like literally the next month, I'm just like, I'm going to do the thing that people do. I'm like, I'm becoming such an adult, but like after a certain time, my phone's gonna go in a box, and like and we're done. And we're not being on the phone until whatever time the next day, because if you don't put those a framework around the boundaries of where social media is in your life, I think it's very easy to let those things affect you. And you have so much to give. You don't want that energy, the precious energy and your precious time in the life that you have, to be even dealing with that, because you do have a mission. So like, I just wanted to encourage you in that, like, to continue to be strong in your mission, and continue to just like know that you are making an impact. And don't give your energy to that. And so I just want you to, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just like, I'm about to get really hard on myself, because it's energy that could be wasted, or energy used with my family or my son and whatever. So how many kids do you have?
Two boys. Hmm.
You got a new man's, you have all this stuff
Hmm.
happening.
Hmm.
Fill us in a little bit about how your kids are doing and what grief is looking like for you in these stages, and how you're moving forward with them. And if you don't
Hmm.
mind just giving some, like, have you had any specific conversations with your sons that have been impactful during this time that you can recall, that was like a moment of either healing or a moment of like hardship that you've had to work through recently?
Yeah, it's a really good question. My sons are still really young. The baby is 2, so he'll be 3 in January, and the oldest is 6, and he'll be 7 in February. So the oldest one, like he's way more aware of the loss. Like the baby really, he hasn't even had that realization yet, right? He knows who Daddy Ryan is. He knows who his daddy here is, like Daddy Anthony, my fiance. Um, but in terms of my older son, I always want to meet him where he is at in his grief and experience. And he's such a, like, kids are so resilient, especially at that young age, right? Because like they can miss people, but they're so in the present moment all the time that they move through it a lot easier than we can as adults, which is like part of my work as a grief coach, is trying to get people to be in the present moment more, because when you're in the present moment, you're not in the past and your trauma, you're not in the future, like trying to plan your future that makes you anxious and overwhelmed. You're just in the moment. And kids, that's what they do. They're only in the moment, right? So they're able to, and like my son will be like, oh, like daddy, he'll bring up things that happen with his dad, and I'm always just encouraging him to talk about him, and just saying like, oh, I love to talk about Daddy Ryan, like you can always talk about him with me. um and then also, which I think is really cool, because I wouldn't say religious, but I'm pretty spiritual. So I believe in signs from our loved ones. And so I'll talk about signs sometimes, like, oh, like when the sky is really pretty, I think that's Daddy Ryan saying hi to us. So, sometimes Jackson will look at the sky and be like, oh, I think Daddy Ryan's saying hi to me. So, like, those kind of things, I feel like I'm doing a good job in just displaying that there is that connection still, and that he accepts that, and like it brings him comfort. Because I always want him to feel connected to his dad, in that way, because we are connected. Like he'll always be connected to him, and just opening up that line of communication that he can talk about his daddy Ryan whenever he wants to. Like that's not a taboo thing. It's not going to, it might make me sad, but that's okay. It mostly at this point makes me really grateful that he talks about him.
What does it look like for you in the relationship? Do you find that that shows up a lot? Comparison, or like, how does that look in the relationship for you guys?
I think now that not really, there's not really a lot of comparison in the beginning, as a lot, if you're a widow or widower that, starts dating again or gets into another relationship, comparison is really a normal human thing that we do. I mean, it's how we kind of have a relationship with the world, is through comparison. So, some people ask me, like, how do you not compare? And I just tell them, don't try not to compare. Just accept it's going to happen, right? Like, we can't eliminate our brains trying to process, like, oh, this person did that. And like, this person's personality is like that. I mean, it's healthy. Um, but instead of looking at it as a negative thing, just coming to that comparison with curiosity. And instead of saying, like, oh, like, my partner who passed, like, did this and now my new partner does that differently. And it's not like one is right or one is wrong, or it's just you might be uncomfortable with it because you're used to something else, right? So something that's different might feel uncomfortable at first, but I think over time you can really appreciate, your new partner for who he or she is in their own, like, individual nature, right? And also appreciate your partner that passed, for who they were when they lived, right? So there's no comparison in terms of, like, one is better than the other. It just, they are two different people, and I'm going to have a completely different experience of living with each of them, and just accepting that, and also just being able to appreciate those differences and being grateful that, oh, I get to experience life in a really completely different way because I get to walk through life with two different people.
Yeah, such a sense of gratitude also too, because that you have, because of the pain and because of the loss. It's like the amount of pain that you've gone through is also shown equally in the amount of gratitude that you have because of what you've walked through.
Yeah.
Like, how much more are you grateful? I sense that with Alex all the time. I'm like, why are you, like, what is your energy is just like, and it's because, like, you just know, like, it's, things become clear, like the rose colored glasses are off, and like, it is, you realize how precious in life is. And so, yeah, I can just sense your gratitude.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. There's a lot of things about grief that really suck. And if you talk to somebody that hasn't really processed their grief yet, like, all they can say is bad things about grief. And that's real, right? Like, that is understandable. But when you get to a point in your journey where you realize that grief actually gives you a perspective of life that makes you, like you said, more grateful and appreciative of the beautiful moments in life. Because I think, unfortunately, when you lose somebody, you you can learn lessons that you're not able to learn otherwise. And it sucks that it takes that kind of loss to appreciate life in that way. And I wish there was another way, but I don't think that there is. Because when you're so close to death, when you lose somebody that's so close to you, I think that appreciation for life is learned through that loss. And not that you can't be appreciative before, but it's a whole other level of gratitude, and just trying to be present. And, when something good happens, like realizing, like, wow, I really need to take this in and celebrate this moment because I know that this is fleeting. Just like bad moments are fleeting, the good moments are fleeting too. And like, I really need to just sit with this, like, beautiful moment right now. Um, and I think when you've gone through a loss, you feel that so much more deeply.
Yeah, there is no mountaintop if everything's all up here. There is, you wouldn't even know the difference. You wouldn't be able to unless you walk through these horrible things. So, talking about the new book, do you have any names yet, or you're not telling people?
Yeah, so my new book, it's titled What Must Be Carried. So it's actually on pre-order right now, so you can pre-order it before March when it comes out. And I'll be sharing, I've been sharing some things online about the content of the book and what to expect from it. I also shared this week a reel with some of an excerpt from the book as well. So you'll be able to kind of learn more information before March when you can actually get it right away.
Did you have any specific music or songs that got you through that first year?
Oh my God. I had like a really like a widow playlist that I played all the time. That was mostly, I think music is such a beautiful way to dip into like not just pain. I mean, definitely pain. And I think we need to feel the pain. And I think songs just like make you feel a certain way, right? Like they transport you to this other realm. But yeah, I had a widow playlist. I can't even think right now about all of the songs that were on there, but they were all pretty like emotional and sad.
So what are you listening to these days? What's the last song you listened to on Spotify? You use Spotify or Apple Music?
I use Apple Music, so I'll actually I have my phone here, so I'm gonna pull it up because I'm looking right now for music for the wedding. So the song that I was listening to was Counting My Blessings, which is such a beautiful song. I'm gonna mess up his name. It is Steph, a sculptor, I think. It's Schlueter. Counting My Blessings, which will be playing when like our bridal party walks in. So it's just like a really
I
beautiful
love
song.
that. Can you type his name? I'm gonna listen to it after this podcast.
Yes, I will. And it has just a really beautiful chorus part that, is really uplifting and hopeful, which is like, it's ironic. Like that's where I'm at in my life now is, life is good. It doesn't mean that I don't have hard days or that, I don't miss Ryan, but I think that's the difference between acute grief is when it's so painful because you're longing for that person and you haven't stepped into this new life that you haven't created yet, and you're still figuring out what that looks like and who you are. And that is a really painful time to be in because you feel really lost. um, and that longing for the person that you can never have again. I mean, that is a pain I don't wish on anybody. um, but not that I don't miss Ryan. I do. I don't long for him anymore because I know longing for him is a suffering that is optional. I don't need, I can still connect with him, feel like connected with him. He's still a part of my life. He will always be a part of my life. He'll be a part of our boys' lives forever. But I'm very fully planted in my new life now, which I've surrendered to my new life and it's
Can you
okay.
repeat that? I think that was really profound. That longing for
Yeah.
him is optional, and that's a type of suffering that is optional versus being still connected to
Mhm.
him. Can you repeat that and then also like explain it again? Because I think that that's really profound.
So one of the things I have learned through the process of grief is that there are parts of grief, the suffering part, that's optional. And the pain isn't optional, but the suffering is. And I think a lot of the time, like people in grief, they willingly choose suffering because they feel like if they let go of the suffering, that they're going to lose the connection with their person. Like if they stop longing for their person in a way that is really painful, and it's like they can't let go of it and they can't accept that their person's gone and they keep trying to recreate this life that they can no longer have. That's a form of suffering because you're never going to be able to go back, right? So people get really caught up in this suffering state where they're like, well, my life now will always feel different. So I'm always trying to go back to what I can never have. I mean, that is suffering, right? It's kind of like when you lose somebody, not in death, but like you break up with someone that you can't have, right? Like you're in love with somebody and you break up for some reason and then you can't move forward because you're always like longing for that person that can never love you back. I mean, that's a form of suffering, right? Because you can never have that again. Instead of trying to focus on yourself and moving forward and potentially finding a new love, right? And not saying that in like the context of, widowhood, but just moving forward in a way that feels authentic to you and recreating a life that is good again. Um, but yeah, I think people, when they long for their person, instead of being able to focus on themselves, they just, like I said before, like they just perpetuate living in the past. That's a form of suffering.
In my own mind and in my heart, like when I'm struggling with something, for me, like we have the tools like deep breathing and like, try to be in the present. And for me, I find that like when I'm really trying to move forward from something, it's a daily choice. But like for me, I guess like praying, like just like asking God to help me. Cause like it's almost like sometimes like I'm like, can I even, this is a choice, but like, can this really be gone? How does that show up for you? Like, is it a conversation that you're having in your mind? Is it a conversation that you're having out loud? Like, what does that really look like in a practical sense?
Yeah, in a practical sense, it's a combination between intentional action that makes me feel at peace. So for me, that's like movement, it's writing, journaling, going to therapy, like all of these things that make me feel grounded and at peace. But it's also that inner dialogue. We really forget how important that inner dialogue is. And part of my own journey, I've realized that being able to surrender to things that you don't have control over, um, I think part of the resistance and suffering in my own grief journey was really not surrendering to my new life. Like I was maybe like dipping my foot in, but I wasn't like completely, jumping into the puddle, right? It was like I still, again, longing for my old life, like longing for it to feel the same way instead of just fully surrendering and being like, I can't have that anymore. I am going to go all in with this new life and be as authentic in my new life and love, my fiance as much as I can without feeling like I'm betraying, Ryan in a way. Like I'm going all in this new life. And I think the problem for a lot of people is like they dip their foot in, they dip their toe into this new life and they pull out, right? Like they're not fully invested. And you have to be. So I think surrendering, like that's a word. Like that was my word for the year is like surrendering to things I can't control. Focusing on the things I can control, like I said, the intentional action and fully being present in what is happening in my present moment.
I think the words that you use, surrender, and also you were like said resistance too. So if you're not surrendering, you're resisting, and that resisting is the suffering when you
Yeah.
choose to resist. Yeah,
Yes.
that makes a lot of sense. That was very helpful, and I'm sure that made it tangible or more understandable for somebody, because it's like I'm learning, like hearing you talk about this, I'm like, this conversation is so practical to people in any walk of life, like not just grief, like whatever you're facing. Like there's 100%, like I feel like so many times in my life I'm just like and resisting, and then the second I surrender, it's like you have all these bricks in your backpack, and like when you surrender, you just put them off, and you're like, why am I carrying this around?
Yeah.
I don't want to carry around the things that I don't have to carry around, so why am I doing that?
I mean, that's exactly right. It's exactly right. And the resistance comes from, there are different aspects of grief that can cause resistance. In my own client work, I see it that can look like guilt, right? Like they feel guilty. That can look different. That could be because they didn't feel like they did or said enough to their person before they left, or they didn't make all the right decisions, or like they could have saved them. Like all of these things that you can't change now, right? Um, and most of the time it wouldn't have, like your person would still be gone. Like you can't change that. You don't get to change that. And you didn't get to control it in the moment either. Like that wasn't up to you. And I think that when you fully accept that, like not just like rationally, right? Like we can rationally know that we can't control death, life, or death, but fully, again, surrendering to that fact to be like, I did everything I could in the moment I couldn't have done anything differently and I can't go back and change it. Like, what a relief that is to truly feel that in your soul. Like, I know this sucks. Like, my reality right now sucks. I hate that my person's gone, and there's nothing I can do about it, like to change that fact. And guilt's not going to make anything different. It's just going to keep me stuck.
Or like punishing yourself for still living, or punishing yourself for whatever reason.
And knowing that although you can't change what happened in the past, you can't bring your person back, you can't change the things that's already transpired. There are things in your present moment that you can control, right? And you know, when you finally start feeling that control is when you become empowered and you're not like kind of going back to how we started this conversation. You don't become a victim to what happened to you.
That's incredible. That's a word. And then yeah, you said something about like you incorporate it into your life. So it's not even just reading the words or understanding the words. The next part of getting the words and the knowledge of how to heal has to get into your heart. And the only way to do that is through action. So like you said, you're doing the things, like you are showing up for therapy. You are exercising, you're getting yourself grounded, you're journaling. I love to journal. I love to write. That one's super helpful for me, but like that's the missing puzzle piece. You can't just sit and listen to a podcast. Like you have to take the time and put it into action. And so yeah, I thought that was really interesting. So it's not just hearing, it's not just understanding it in your mind, it's using your body and just living in the gratitude and in the surrender, as you would say.
Yeah, and I think that intentional action piece, that's the hardest part because we have to get really uncomfortable, right? We can't just because we want to feel better, right? So we listen to the podcast and we read the books and we like go on Google and we research all of the things and the checklists and whatever. But if you're just a passive observer to like the things that you're supposed to do and you don't experiment yourself as to actually what helps you like in present time, like you are doing the thing, you're never going to be able to figure out how to live without your person because it's just all going to be like conceptual. It's not actually you're living the things, right? um and, you know, a part of what keeps people stuck is we don't want to get uncomfortable because we're already so freaking uncomfortable in grief, right? Like it's so painful. There's so much dread. There's so much anxiousness. Like there's so much sadness. And we're like, well, I don't want to do anything that makes me feel any more of these really bad feelings. But those are the things that you have to do in order to move through them. Because if you don't do those things, you're never going to teach yourself, you're never going to teach your nervous system that you can bear these hard emotions and move through them and survive them, because that's where the resilience comes from. That's where the strength comes from. That's where you're learning how to live without your person, not just conceptually, but like you're literally living without your person. And that's how you build confidence. That's how you find yourself again. Like all of these things are foundational to healing.
Is there anything else that you want to talk about for the listeners that can help them in their journey wherever they're at?
I think it's going back to what I said, like a couple minutes back, is you're not going to find yourself, you're not going to find healing, you're not going to find peace if you don't get uncomfortable. You're going to have to go face to face with the things that you don't want to face. And that's the only way you're going to be able to take steps forward. And if you keep avoiding the hard stuff, you're going to get stuck.
Object and movement you're going to get momentum, but if you're just stagnant, like it's like you go backwards. So you don't even really have the choice to stay where you're at. Like that's not even an option. Either you're going forward or you're going backwards. That's it. That's all there is. And I think so it's like we're faced with it every single day when it's like, am I going to go to the gym today? I'm like, if I don't go to the gym, I know I'm tired right now, but if I don't go, I'm going to be worse off and I'll be even more tired tomorrow. And then it's weird because it's like you go and you do the thing and it's like life comes back into your body and you're like, wait a second, like I'm not tired, I'm not weak. I just had to show up. I think showing up for yourself is what you're
Yeah.
basically saying. Show up for yourself, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it.
Yeah.
Like show up for yourself, and like
Hmm.
that is the way out. That's the way forward. I do want to ask you. I feel like,
Yeah.
did you have a
Hmm.
really strong community around you when you were going initially through the grief? And how would you say, was there somebody that showed up in your life in a specific way that was very impactful towards you?
So after Ryan's accident, he was a police officer, a canine officer. So the police community was, and just the community at large were incredible. They showed up in ways that it's just, I'll never be able to repay them for what they did. Um, and then after Ryan's like celebration of life, a lot of that support just kind of faded away, that's what happens so many times. And it was really hard. I really didn't have that much support after he died. It was like there was so much, like it was overwhelming, and then there was like none. So it was a very abrupt shift because everyone went back to their lives. It was a really hard 6 months between Ryan's accident and when he died. And then 6 weeks after Ryan's celebration of life, his best friend died too.
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
And like very suddenly just went into cardiac arrest. So, and it was the same community, right? They were part of the same community. So I think people were so like exhausted by the pain. Um, So it was hard. I mean, it was hard for everybody. I didn't, I did a lot by myself. And then when I met my fiance, Anthony, like, he was my biggest support. Like he was coming over every weekend, helping me with the boys. I mean, like folding laundry, like putting groceries away, shopping with me, taking care of them, like all the things so I could get a break because I was a solo mom for like 2 years before we moved in together.
Is there anything that you remember, and this is a loaded question, so bear with me. Is there anything,
Uh-huh.
obviously people say things that are stupid, and because first of all, people don't know how to handle situations, especially if you've never been in a situation before, right?
Mhm.
If you've never had somebody who's had a spouse pass away, like people don't know the right things to say. And I'm sure that you had so much compassion for when people did put their foot in their mouth, because it's probably going to happen more often than it's not going to happen, I would assume. But was there something that you would like, that you remember being told or that was said to you that made you angry? And if you had the opportunity to just educate people on what not to say, was there something that really pissed you off that you would like to tell people, like, don't say this to someone who's in grief?
Oh man, there's a lot. There's a lot of things, and I get it's not that people have bad intentions, right? Like when people say things, it's out of the goodness of their hearts because they don't know what to say, right? But sometimes like intention doesn't matter if it's not helpful to somebody that's going through the worst days of their life. Like if you are willingly just saying like, well, I'm doing the best I can, but you're not willing to learn how to do better, then you're part of the problem. So I mean, some of the things I really hated, I can't imagine because it made me feel really alone. Because I'm like, so you're saying my pain is so untouchable that you can't even try to imagine what it's like for me. Like that made me feel so alone and isolated. Because I'm able to like I haven't lost a child, but I can imagine the pain that would cause, and I like cry like when I see moms that have lost their babies, like because I feel that. So maybe say don't say I can't imagine. Just say this is really hard. I'm so sorry you're going through this, and you know, like I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to help you, right? Like tangible showing up, like instead of saying like, let me know what you need because you're not going to know what you need. The person's not going to reach out for help. Be like, hey, I sent Starbucks to your house. There's your favorite drink is on your porch. Like that stuff is helpful. Um, or like I'm bringing dinner over. If you feel like company, let me know. Otherwise, it's going to be in front of your porch at 6 o'clock, so you don't have to cook tonight. Or like, I'm going to take your kids for the afternoon so you can shower and nap. Like it really isn't about saying like the wrong or right words. It's more so showing up in a tangible way that takes off the load of somebody that already has the world on their shoulders.
That's really helpful because I don't think I would have thought that. And I'm immediately, as soon as you said that, I'm like, there have been so many times that someone's been going through something and I've told them, I can't imagine. I personally have said that. Like, not maybe to someone, maybe to someone who's lost somebody. So thank you for educating me. I wish we had this conversation sooner.
And it's not to say like some other person, like even some other widow might say differently. Like, I don't know, that just personally, that's why everyone, it's so personal to me. Like, I can't imagine like that might not, it's not that it offended me, but it made me feel isolated and alone, which is not what you want to feel when you are going through tragedy. Um, but I think just don't silver line things. Don't try to bright side things. Be really honest about the reality of the situation, because the person, like, your job isn't to fix anything or to make them feel better. It's to be with them in their experience, which really sucks. So just let it suck. Like, that's okay. You don't need to fix anything. So if your words, like if you're looking for the right words, don't use fixing words. Don't try to be like, at least they're not suffering anymore. Like, that's not helpful to say like, I'm really sorry that you don't get to have your like husband or best friend. Like, that's a tremendous loss. Just that is the reality. Just be in the reality of the situation. Those are the words that help.
And do you think that that's because when someone just is able to keep it simple and say sorry, they're just validating your experience? Whereas if they're saying, oh, well, at least they're invalidating what's happening to you and kind of disregarding the pain, like, why does it land that way?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, when they meet you where you are and they're saying, this really is terrible. Like, this is so sad, and I hate that this is happening. You're validating the experience instead of, like you said, invalidating the experience, because like my husband died, right? Like, I don't, in the acute grief, I don't want to be made to try to feel better. No words are going to make me feel better. Just let me feel terrible. Like, that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So when can we expect this new book?
So my new book, it comes out March 5th of 2025, so in a few months. And you can pre-order now, which is exciting, and that's always really helpful. And it's called What Must Be Carried. So yeah, just something to look out for. And if you need help in your own grief journey, if you want to see more of my content on grief, there's so many like free resources that I have and good information. You can go to my website, whitneylynnallen.com. You can go and find me on Instagram, Whitney Lynn Allen, TikTok, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So make it really easy.
Guys, thank you so much for listening. Whitney, thank you for just sharing your time with us and your experiences and your resources. We're very excited to be reading the second book that you have coming out March 5th. Guys, check it out and make sure to like and subscribe. Go ahead and follow Whitney Allen and just tune into what she's doing and how she is moving through grief and moving forward in life and getting stronger through these experiences. And I hope that you find this to be a very resourceful community, and just know, everyone listening, that you're not alone. No matter what you're going through, there are people that are walking through the same thing, and we're here to help you. And we don't want you to ever feel like more isolated than you already do. So, yeah, we're here for you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good one. Whitney, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for The Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram at The Wake Wellness. Thanks for listening.